You are sitting in your own office on the 14th floor, reviewing final candidates for a director position, when you see his name at the top of the resume pile, and for one full second, your heart forgets how to beat correctly. Winslow Radcliffe, 10 years. You know his handwriting before you even open the file, because you spent 11 years memorizing it on birthday, cards and grocery lists, and eventually, on the divorce papers he signed without looking you in the eye. You remember with sudden and total clarity, standing in the kitchen of the house he kept, watching him pack the last of his things, listening to him say the words that had followed you like a shadow for a decade. You'll never make it alone, Araminta. You're not built for this without me. You are built for exactly this, apparently. You are the CEO of the company he is now applying to work for. You don't say anything yet. You just close the folder and you breathe, before you go any further with this one. If stories like this, about quiet strength and the moment, the truth finally, catches up to the people who doubted us, mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe now. There are more stories like Araminta's waiting for you, and you won't want to miss what comes next. All right, let's go back to where this one truly began. You met Winslow Radcliffe when you were 26 years old, waiting tables at a diner outside of Richmond to pay for night classes in business, administration, exhausted in the particular way only young ambition can be, exhausted, running on coffee and hope, and the belief that hard work eventually gets noticed. He was charming in the way certain men are charming when they've never once had to prove it. Easy smile, easy confidence, the kind of man who filled a room simply by walking into it. He told you on your third date that he could see something in you nobody else could see. You believed him. You wanted desperately at 26 for someone to see something in you. You married him 2 years later. In a small ceremony in your mother's backyard, your father, Cyprian, a quiet man who worked 40 years at the same steel plant, walking you down a makeshift aisle made of folding chairs and mason jars filled with wildflowers. You remember your father squeezing your hand before letting go and whispering, "You don't need anyone to complete you, sweetheart." You were already whole. You didn't fully understand what he meant. Not for a long time. The first few years of your marriage were, if you're honest with yourself now, genuinely good ones. You worked as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized logistics firm while finishing your degree at night, and Winslow worked in sales, always talking about the big deal that was coming, the promotion that was always 6 months away, the opportunity that never quite arrived. You didn't mind carrying more of the weight in those early years. You loved him. You believed in the life you were building together. But somewhere around your 7th year of marriage, something in the dynamic between you began to shift, slowly, the way tides shift, imperceptible in any single moment, undeniable when you finally look back at how far the water has moved. Winslow began to resent your ambition around the same time you were promoted to operations manager at the logistics firm, promotion you had worked toward for 4 years, studying late into the night after full days of work, sacrificing sleep and, if you're honest, sacrificing pieces of the marriage itself in the process. He didn't celebrate the promotion. He made a joke about it at dinner with his brother, Thackeray, something about how you were wearing the pants now, and everyone laughed except you. And you laughed too, because that was easier than sitting with how much the comment actually stung. It became a pattern after that. Small comments, delivered with a smile, designed to remind you, gently, plausibly, deniably, that your success was somehow inconvenient. "Must be nice having a job that actually matters," he'd say, only half joking when you came home late from a project deadline. "Don't forget where you came from," he'd say, when you mentioned an idea for starting your own consulting practice someday, a dream you'd been quietly nurturing since your 20s. You started shrinking your own ambitions to make the marriage more comfortable. You stopped mentioning the consulting idea. You turned down a regional promotion that would have required more travel, telling yourself it was a practical decision about the marriage, when really some tired part of you already knew you were protecting Winslow's fragile sense of himself at the expense of your own future. You didn't fully understand then that a marriage which requires you to become smaller in order to survive is not actually a marriage at all. It's a slow erosion, dressed up as compromise. Looking back now, you can trace the exact shape of it. The dinners where your accomplishments were quietly steered into jokes, the nights you rehearsed how to mention good news at work in a way that wouldn't sound like bragging, the slow, cumulative habit of making yourself smaller so the room could still comfortably fit him. Nobody teaches you to notice that kind of erosion while it's happening. You only ever see the shoreline clearly once it's already gone. The end came when you were 37, in the kitchen of the house you'd bought together. A house you had, in fact, put more money into than he had, though that detail never seemed to matter in the story he told himself. You'd found out 3 weeks earlier about a woman named Linnea from his office, younger, unburdened by a decade of resentment, someone who apparently made him feel, in his own words when you confronted him, like a man again. "I need something different, Araminta," he told you, packing his things into cardboard boxes with a calmness that felt, in the moment, like its own particular cruelty. "You've gotten so wrapped up in your career. I feel like I'm just an accessory in your life now." You stood there 37 years old, watching 11 years of your life get folded into boxes, and you felt something in your chest crack open. Not just grief for the marriage, but grief for every version of yourself you had, quietly set aside to keep him comfortable. "You'll never make it alone," he said then, almost gently, almost like he believed he was being kind by warning you. "You're not built for this without me, Araminta. You need someone to lean on. You always have." You didn't argue. You didn't have the strength to argue, not that night. You simply stood in the kitchen and watched him leave. And later you would learn that he had said some version of that same sentence to nearly everyone in your shared circle of friends, that you would fall apart without him, that you were in over your head pursuing your career ambitions alone, that within a year you'd likely be begging him to come back. Word travels in small circles. You heard secondhand, through people who thought they were doing you a favor by telling you exactly what he'd been saying about you at dinners and holiday gatherings for months after the divorce, and something about hearing it secondhand, knowing he was narrating your unraveling to an audience while you were still privately trying to hold yourself together, heard in a way that felt different from the divorce itself, sharper, more deliberate. You remember sitting in your car outside a friend's house one evening, having just learned what he'd told everyone at a dinner party the week before, gripping the steering wheel so tightly your knuckles ached, thinking, "He doesn't just want to leave me. He wants everyone to believe I can't survive it." There is a particular loneliness in being underestimated publicly by someone who once held your whole heart in his hands. The year after the divorce was the hardest of your life. You moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, the kind with thin walls and a radiator that clanked all winter, and you lay awake many nights doing exactly what he'd predicted, doubting yourself, wondering if he was right, wondering if 11 years of building your identity around a marriage had left nothing solid underneath. You were 37 years old, starting over, and the internal voice, the one that sounds suspiciously like every person who has ever underestimated you, would whisper, late at night, "Maybe he's right. Maybe you don't know how to build a life on your own. Maybe the version of you that exists without him is smaller, weaker, less capable than you want to believe." You remember one night in particular, sitting on the floor of that small apartment, because you hadn't yet bought a proper couch, eating dinner out of a takeout container, crying in the specific, exhausted way of a person who has been strong for far too long and simply has nothing left to hold the dam in place. You thought about calling him. You thought about the strange, humiliating pull toward proving him wrong by going back to him, just so the wrongness would have somewhere to land. You didn't call him. Instead, you called your father. Cyprian answered on the second ring the way he always did, and you told him everything. The doubt, the exhaustion, the quiet terror that Winslow had been right about you all along. "Araminta," your father said, his voice steady in the way it had always been steady, even through 40 years at a steel plant that could have hardened a lesser man into bitterness. "You were building things before you ever met that man. You'll build things long after he's forgotten. Don't you dare let his fear about his own smallness convince you that you're the one who's small." You held on to that sentence the way you'd hold on to a rope in dark water. Some nights, in the years that followed, it was the only thing keeping your head above the surface. You started your consulting practice 8 months after the divorce, the same dream you'd quietly set aside years earlier to protect Winslow's comfort, working out of your small apartment with a second-hand desk and a laptop you'd bought on a payment plan. It was terrifying. You had exactly 2 clients in the first 3 months, both small local businesses who paid you modestly and paid you late. You worked 80-hour weeks. You ate a lot of instant noodles. You cried in your car more than once, parked outside meetings you weren't sure you were qualified to walk into. There were moments that first winter when you genuinely considered quitting, not because the work itself was too hard, but because the doubt was so loud it drowned out every small success. You remember one particular Tuesday, staring at a spreadsheet of numbers that simply weren't adding up in your favor, thinking maybe this is the proof. Maybe this is where I find out he was right. But slowly, the way things build when you refuse to stop showing up, it started to work. Your third client referred you to a mid-sized regional firm needing operational restructuring. That project led to 2 more. Within 18 months, you had hired your first employee, a sharp, quietly brilliant young woman named Adeline, fresh out of business school, who reminded you achingly of yourself at 26. By year 3, you had incorporated formally Thornfield Consulting Group, named after the old oak tree that had stood in your grandmother's backyard. Your entire childhood, a small private homage to the woman who had taught you, long before Winslow ever entered your life, that a woman's worth was never contingent on a man's approval of it. By year 6, you had 30 employees. By year 8, you had 90. An office building of your own on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and a reputation in your industry for turning around struggling operations with a precision and empathy that made clients trust you the moment you walked into a room. You built all of it without him. Every single piece. You didn't think about Winslow often in those years, not because the wound had fully healed, exactly, but because you had simply become too busy building something real to spend much time revisiting something broken. Occasionally, through mutual acquaintances, you'd hear fragments that his relationship with Linnea hadn't lasted, that he'd changed jobs twice, then 3 times, that the sales career he'd always talked about elevating into management had instead slowly, quietly stalled. You felt on those occasions a small pang of something you didn't entirely want to examine too closely, not satisfaction exactly, but something adjacent to it, something human and a little uncomfortable in its honesty. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning 10 years after the divorce, reviewing your director-level hiring pipeline, you opened a resume folder and saw his name, Winslow Radcliffe, applying for a director of sales, position at Thornfield Consulting Group, your company. The one you had built, brick by brick, from a second-hand desk in a 1-bedroom apartment with clanking radiators. You sat very still at your desk for a long moment, the folder open in front of you, feeling something complicated move through your chest. Not triumph, not yet, but something closer to disorientation. The strange vertigo of the past suddenly, unexpectedly, standing in your doorway. You almost passed the file along without reading it. Some tired, protective part of you wanted to simply hand it to your head of HR, a sharp and steady woman named Isolde, and let the process unfold impersonally, without ever having to sit across from him again. But another part of you, the part that had spent 10 years building something entirely of your own making, wanted quietly and honestly to see this through yourself. You called Isolde into your office and asked her to schedule the candidate for a final interview, personally, with you. You know him? Isolde said carefully, having pieced together enough over the years to understand the shape of your history, even without every detail. I do, you said. That's exactly why I want to be the one in the room. The morning of the interview, you stood in your office bathroom, looking at yourself in the mirror, feeling something you hadn't quite expected to feel. Not nervousness about him, but a strange, quiet tenderness toward the version of yourself from 10 years earlier, the one who sat on an apartment floor crying over takeout, terrified that she'd never build anything real without him standing beside her. You thought about that morning in the kitchen, watching him fold his life into cardboard boxes. You'll never make it alone, Araminta. You're not built for this without me. You looked at your reflection, a woman in a tailored navy blazer, 47 years old, silver threading gently through dark hair you no longer bothered to dye, the CEO of a company employing 90 people, standing in an office on the 14th floor of a building she had every right to be standing in. You had, in fact, built exactly this without him. You had built it, if anything, because of what he told you, wearing his doubt like fuel instead of like a verdict. Winslow walked into your office at 2 p.m. sharp, and you watched, with a strange, clinical distance, the exact moment recognition crossed his face. He froze in the doorway. For one full second, the confident, easy-smiling man you remembered simply wasn't there, replaced instead by something rawer, more startled. A man visibly recalculating the entire shape of the room he had just walked into. Araminta, he said. I didn't. The listing said Thornfield. I didn't realize. Please sit down, Winslow, you said, your voice calm, professional, betraying none of the storm, quietly moving beneath it. I understand this is unexpected. For both of us. He sat, visibly rattled, in the chair across from your desk, the same kind of chair. You noted with quiet irony that countless nervous job candidates had sat in before him, though none of them had ever once told you that you'd never make it alone. You conducted the interview the way you conducted every interview. Fairly. Thoroughly, professionally. You asked about his experience, his approach to client relationships, his vision for the sales team he hoped to lead. And as he answered, stumbling slightly, clearly thrown by the disorientation of being interviewed by the woman he had once confidently predicted would fall apart without him, you felt the strange vertigo of the morning settle, slowly, into something steadier. You were not doing this to humiliate him. You want that understood clearly, even now, looking back. You had built something too substantial, too hard-won, to need his suffering as proof of your success. But you would not either pretend the moment wasn't significant. You would not shrink the truth to make him more comfortable, the way you had once shrunk your entire self for 11 years to do exactly that. I have to ask, Winslow said finally, partway through the interview, his composure cracking slightly around the edges. All of this, Thornfield, I had no idea. You wouldn't have, you said simply. You weren't there for any of it. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was just honest, sitting quietly in the room between you, doing all the work that 10 years of unspoken things had been waiting to do. I said things to you, Winslow said, after a long moment, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier bravado, that I don't think I ever really examined. About you not making it without me. I think, he paused, and you watched something genuinely difficult move across his face, something that looked almost like the beginning of real self-awareness. 10 years too late to matter to the marriage, though perhaps not too late to matter at all. I think I said that because I was terrified of what it would mean. About me if you succeeded, without needing me to be the reason. You sat with that for a moment. It didn't erase 11 years. It didn't undo the nights you'd spent doubting your own worth, because of a story he'd told about your weakness in order to protect his own fragile sense of strength. But it was, you recognized, the most honest thing he had ever said to you. I appreciate you saying that, you said. I mean that, Winslow. But I need you to understand something too. I didn't build this to prove you wrong. I built it because I finally stopped, believing I was too small to build something of my own. Those are two very different things. And it took me a long time to learn the difference. You did not hire Winslow Radcliffe. It wasn't punishment. His qualifications, when you looked honestly at them, simply weren't the strongest among your candidates. And you had built Thornfield on the principle of never letting personal history override professional judgment in either direction. You told him this plainly, without cruelty, at the end of the interview. I don't think this is the right fit, you said. Not because of our history. Because there's a stronger candidate for what this role needs. I hope you understand the difference. He nodded, something unreadable moving across his face. Disappointment, perhaps, or something closer to a strange, complicated relief. I understand, he said. And then, standing to leave, he added quietly, for what it's worth, Araminta, you did make it. More than made it. I was wrong. I think some part of me always knew I was wrong. It was just easier to believe otherwise. You didn't need his validation. You want that understood clearly. You had stopped needing it somewhere, around year 3 of building this company from a second-hand desk in a one-bedroom apartment. But hearing it anyway 10 years later, standing in an office you had built entirely with your own hands, felt like a door quietly closing on something that had been left ajar for far too long. That evening, you sat alone on the balcony of the home you had bought 3 years earlier, modest by some standards, but entirely, unambiguously yours. And you thought about the woman who had once sat crying on an apartment floor, terrified that she was too small to build a life without a man standing beside her. You thought about your father, Cyprian, gone 5 years now, and the sentence he'd given you on the worst night of your life. You were building things before you ever met that man. You'll build things long after he's forgotten. He had been right in the end, in a way you couldn't have fully appreciated at 37, drowning in doubt on an apartment floor. Winslow's absence had not been the thing that broke you. It had, in the strangest and most unexpected way, been the empty space in which you finally discovered how much you were capable of building on your own. You think about Adeline, now a senior partner at Thornfield, the young woman you hired in your second year who reminded you so much of yourself. How you watched her grow the same way you once dreamed of growing, and how proud you feel. Some quiet mornings watching her walk into a boardroom with the same steady confidence. You had to build for yourself, piece by piece, with no one handing it to you. You think some evenings about every person watching this story who has been told, by someone who was supposed to love them, that they would never make it alone. Every single mother told she couldn't raise children without a partner. Every man told he was too old to start over. Every person whose confidence was quietly, deliberately dismantled by someone who needed them small in order to feel large themselves. You want to tell them what took you 10 years in a company with 90 employees to fully understand. The people who tell you that you cannot survive without them are very often revealing their own fear, not your actual limitations. Their doubt is not a prophecy. It is at most a challenge, one you get to decide, entirely on your own terms, whether to accept. You raise a glass of wine that evening, alone on your balcony toward the city skyline, toward the 14th floor office waiting for you again tomorrow morning, toward every version of yourself that refused, even in the hardest nights, to believe she was as small as someone else needed her to be. You were never going to fall apart without him. You were simply waiting to find out what you could build without anyone standing in the way. He told me I'd never make it alone. I didn't just make it. I built the company he came asking to join.